So another point that came up over the weekend with Geshe-la's teachings was the importance of renunciation and how that's really the foundation of our spiritual practice. In other words, the mind that wants to be free of dukkha in all its forms, not just the ouch kind of suffering, but the whole dukkha of being under the control of ignorance and afflictions and karma, the whole situation of dukkha that makes us take this body in the first place, and that makes us have a mind that's filled with afflictions. And so it's so important to really develop some renunciation about that, because otherwise, as I say so often, Dharma really becomes a hobby, because at the base we are sense pleasure addicts, aren't we? Sense pleasure addicts? Okay. I mean, we call ourselves Dharma practitioners, but, you know, at the root, if it's a choice between Dharma and experiencing pain, you know, if it's a choice between Dharma and a whole lot of sense pleasure, what do we go for? Yeah, we go for the sense pleasure. And I'm not just talking about, you know, seeing, hearing, these kinds of things, but the whole emotional gooiness of relationships. Anytime that we're seeking happiness outside of ourselves, we're in this kind of mental state. Yeah, and so this attachment to sense pleasure really makes Dharma practice very difficult. And it's interesting because that's the thing we have to overcome to really begin to practice, but it's the thing that makes Dharma practice difficult. So we're in that, you know, kind of catch-22 situation where you're trying to eliminate your attachment to sense pleasure, but the attachment to sense pleasure makes it difficult for you to practice the Dharma that wants to eliminate it. Yeah, it's the same thing with, you know, ignorance, self-grasping ignorance. But it's something to repeatedly contemplate and look at in our lives. So not just intellectually blah blah, but really look at our lives and what happens when our mind is just constantly drawn to sense pleasure. Yeah. What happens to our ethical discipline? What happens to our wish to be a benefit to others? What happens to our love and compassion? All these things get compromised, you know. What happens to our wish to develop wisdom? We're distracted from it, yeah. So it's not a thing of saying, I'm bad because I'm attracted to sense pleasure. Don't get into that whole moral judgment of I'm good, I'm bad. That's not the point. The point is that we have very deep and sincere spiritual aspirations that we want to actualize, and that's a part of ourself that is very precious, that we should respect, you know. And these are things that get in the way of us actualizing our deepest, most heartfelt, precious part of ourselves. Okay? So it's not a question of we're good or bad people. That's totally a wrong way of looking at it. Okay? But it's just, I want to do this with my life, and, you know, this is really a pain in the neck, you know, when my mind is just attached to this and attached to that and attached to the other thing and seeking this and seeking that and thinking the other. It's just, it's, you know, it's antithetical to what I really want in my heart. Yeah? And so when we see the disadvantages of life, of that, then it becomes much easier to not get drawn by it. Yeah? Okay? But we have to really spend the time seeing the disadvantages. Yeah? If we just you know, think about it a little bit when I give a morning motivation. But the rest of the day, you know, it's out. And then when you're doing your practice, you're meditating on something else, yeah, then it's going to be hard to really integrate this, you know. So it's something, again, repeatedly, and looking, you know. And then when we see ourselves captivated by sense pleasure and drawn away by sense objects and relationships and things like that, then instead of going, oh, I'm such a bad person, or instead of going, oh, Dharma is really wrong because this is happiness, you know, instead of doing either of those two minds, just stopping and looking honestly at what is my experience. What is my experience in the short term? What is my intention? What are my motivations? How does this affect me in the long term in terms of the creation of my karma? How does this affect my wish for liberation and enlightenment? And so just evaluate, assess, investigate. Okay? And then wisdom comes in our mind. And when we have that wisdom, then we're not in the self-critical trip or the guilty trip or that kind of stuff. Okay?